Good evening, my holy sisters and brothers. What a beautiful song. That's the first time we've played it here on Accidental Talmudist. It's a new song for us from Moshe Storch, our musical director, our musical genius. Matovu, Ochalecha Yaakov, Mishkenaitecha Yisrael. How good are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, your dwellings, Mishkenasecha, your dwellings, O Israel. It's exactly what we're going to be talking about tonight. This is a key DAF because today the whole picture is going to start to come together. Let's light up the darkness. Who's going to be with us on this special Sunday evening? Who's first? Stephen Geger from Dover, New Hampshire. Yudah Hudit Sobel from Florence, South Carolina. Melissa Itel-Jurin, good evening from Great Neck, New York. Gwen Strong, shalom from Michigan. Harold Black is with us from Smoky, Roseburg, Oregon. Smoky all over the West Coast. May we only hear good news. Luz Rodriguez, shalom from Florida. Ella Gabriella from Connecticut. Nancy Brundemole, Wright from Southern Pines, North Carolina. Amy Colessa, peace and good from Maryland. Tom Beck, Shavuot from Philadelphia. Vaughn Billow, shalom from Fremont, Ohio. Danielle Vezana, Peabody, Massachusetts. Bryna Bloomfield, let me pause right there. This show is dedicated by Bryna Bloomfield to her mom, Carolyn. All our learning tonight is dedicated to the beautiful, beautiful memory on her yahrzeit, the anniversary that she left this world, of Bracha Bas Yaakov Veberta. May her soul always be, may she always be, may her memory always be for a blessing for us. May her soul be bound up in the bonds of eternal life. May our learning tonight, which we dedicate to her memory, elevate her neshama, her soul, a little higher in the world of souls. Our sages teach that when we learn in the memory of someone we care about, a soul that's left this world, when we learn in their honor, when we dedicate our learning to their honor, they get a bump up, a little higher, a little closer to the throne, the holy throne of the Holy One. They get a little closer in the world to come. And so we dedicate our learning tonight to Bracha Bas, the daughter of Yaakov and Berta. Finishing our welcomings. Hi, I'm Burke. We welcome you from Charlotte. Rochelle Rosen says, good evening. Juanita Morgan, shalom from Atlanta. Lucy Ram Johnson from Minneapolis. Bill Eldridge, shalom. I always love seeing that little key emoji in my notifications because it's a key daf. Portia Kvatek from Bakersfield. Emily Gladding, From Delaware, John Shook from Panama City, Florida. Akiva Hartwell from West Virginia. Sue Strauss in the house from Chicago. Can I catch up? Janet Castillo from Denver, Colorado. Arnold Albin in the house from Smoky, Northridge, California. Akram Malik says, good morning. Maxine Bodenhammer is praying for us every day. Celsa Canedo, for the people who in the smoke path of smoke, I imagine. Celsa from Pasadena, Texas. J.A. Greenfield from New Jersey. I just can't catch up. Kim Bloom says hi. Juanita Morgan from Atlanta. Margaret Pillin says hello. James Roth from Indianapolis. And Rosario Vento from Newburgh. And that's as much as is caught up over here. And over on the YouTube side, Neil from Virginia, Lynn in Texas, and Marjorie in Georgia. All right. We have a lot of work to do. Turn on, engage our brains. But today it's nice because we're gonna come out. We're gonna zoom out to 30,000 feet and then zoom in granular, and our whole picture of what we've been doing is going to start to make a little more sense. This is episode 253. We started on January 5th. We've done 253 shows to mark 253 pages of the DAF. The entire journey, the 7.5-year journey through the Talmud, will be 2,711 pages. So we're approaching that 10% mark of our journey. The first 64 pages, brachas, blessings, how we give God our blessing, how we thank God for everything that's in our lives, how we just try to manifest gratitude over and over during the day, how we try not to partake of anything in the world without being grateful to God for it, because that would be like stealing. 64 pages, we learn how to appreciate our blessings, to thank God, and not only thank God, but to bless God. It's an odd concept. God blesses us, right? God blesses us with everything that we need and sheds or shares some of God's holiness with us. What does it mean that we bless God? God gave us that ability. God gave us that power. He gave us minds that are free, hearts that are free, so we can choose to thank God, choose to fear God, choose to love God. And when we do those things, we bless God. The next 149 pages of the Talmud were tractate Shabbos. Right? All week long, we do and we do and we do and we make and we create and we work for 6 days like God worked for 6 days. The seventh day comes and we stop. So the first thing we learn how to do is to stop doing everything from the week. And so much of that 149 pages was what we don't do on Shabbos, so we distinguish Shabbos from the rest of the week. But the command about Shabbos in the 10 Commandments is not just to guard Shabbos. To be Shomer Shabbos is to guard it. How do you guard Shabbos? By not doing any of the things that you do during the week that constitute creative work. When you stop all of that, you're guarding Shabbos from that stuff. But we are also commanded to delight in Shabbos. And that's all the things that we do on Shabbos as opposed to what we don't do. And we celebrate and we bless God and we bless the light and we bless the wine and we bless the bread. And we take it and we stop everything that we're doing in order to thank God and appreciate how much we have in our lives and to literally enjoy it. And then we come to the third volume of the Talmud tractate, Eruvin, that we're in now, which is about 100 pages of an area of Shabbos. But what area of Shabbos? It's all about enjoying Shabbos, right? So we've gotten, so much of Shabbos is about what we can't do, and then we also started to learn what we do. Eruvin is about enabling ourselves to do all those things that allow us to enjoy Shabbos. How do we enjoy Shabbos? How do we celebrate all our blessings in the world? How do we celebrate that life is good, that we've reached a place where we can just stop and enjoy it? How do we celebrate? What do we need in order to celebrate? We need light, because if we're in the darkness, we're not celebrating. And that's why we light candles for Shabbos. What else do we need when we celebrate? We need drink, right? So we have wine, we make a kiddush on Shabbos. What else do we need? We need food, right? We can't have a celebration without food. You know, we drink a little, we eat a lot. And we need that food. And we need that food for Shabbos. And so much of the rules are on Shabbos about how we don't cook on Shabbos, so we make sure we cook all day Friday so that we have an amazing meal on Shabbos. But if we have light, and if we have wine, and if we have food, what good is it if we don't have people? How much have we learned how important it is to have people in our lives when we've been kept apart? It's like God wanted us to experience isolation. Some people live a COVID isolation all year round. And it's easy to forget about them because they're isolated and they're not present when we're getting together and celebrating. How important is it to remember everybody who's isolated and reach out to them and make sure that they're not alone? Because we know that the main thing we need to celebrate, it's not like we can't celebrate in the absence of it, but we want it so much to have people around us, to have the people together. And so Eruvin is all about transforming our space in order to make an enclosure of holiness. Why? What is that enclosure of holiness for? So that within that holiness, we keep Shabbos, we celebrate, we carry what we need into it, like, people who are going to bring their babies and need to carry them so that they can be there. People who live far away so that they can be there. Things that we forgot to bring that we need for the meal so we can bring them, right? We can carry objects through the Shabbos courtyards and rooftops and fenced-in enclosures, and we can bring the utensils for a meal so we can have that celebratory meal. And we move the borders so that we can bring people to our meal. And that's what an Eruv is all about. And here we are in chapter 3 of Tractate Eruvin on page 35, Lamed Hey, page 35 of Tractate Eruvin. We're in chapter 3. We're going to finish our discussion of Mishna number 6 with God's help and open Mishna number 7. And what we've been talking about now is not just the enclosure or the movement of the borders of the limits of how far I can walk, since I don't want to go that way and I want to go further that way than my limits would allow me. I want to move my dwelling over there. And how do I move my dwelling? By depositing 2 meals worth of food in a safe spot that I can access over there in that direction, so I can move my whole my Sabbath dwelling along with its diameter, with its radius, right, with the circle that surrounds it at its outside limit, move the whole thing over. And I do that by depositing 2 meals worth of food. And it's important to understand as we go forward that Eruv is a kind of word that starts to have multiple meanings in the discussion of the law, area of law of Eruv, or Eruvin, plural in Aramaic. Eruvin, multiple Eruvs. In this area of law, the Eruv is the enclosure. It's the fact that we've established an enclosure of holiness using both physical partitions and the law. If you think about any time you enter into a contract with somebody, whether you're signing a mortgage or a car loan, or you're hiring an exterminator to clean your house, or someone to build your house, or someone to fix your car, any relationship you enter with somebody else that's going to involve exchanging money, there's either a written or an implied contract. And that contract creates a legal edifice. It's a building not in the physical sphere, but it affects our lives just as much as physical walls. A contract is a building in the legal dimension, and it limits and opens our actions, right? It affects our behavior the same way that physical walls do. So when we make an Eruv for the purpose of carrying, it's that whole enclosure. But the word Eruv also refers to the deposit of food that I'm going to use to establish my Eruv. Now the word Eruv also comes to mean that the food that creates the Eruv, right? So my Eruv could either refer to the food that I'm talking about, where I put it, or the whole thing that I'm trying to create. Whether it's joining courtyards so we can carry from one place to another, or moving my dwelling so that I can walk further in one direction, or even a concept we haven't talked about, the Erev Tavshilin, which is a declaration we make, an Erev we create that has in the spiritual dimension, has legal ramifications in the spiritual dimension, when we say that we're going to cook on a festival, because this year Rosh Hashanah is on Shabbos. It's on Friday. Rosh Hashanah starts Friday night and is Saturday, Shabbos, and it's a 2-day holiday, so Sunday as well. Sometimes Rosh Hashanah arrives before Shabbos, like Thursday, Friday. So then you would have to cook on Rosh Hashanah for your Shabbos meal. And normally you wouldn't cook on a holiday in order for a meal that comes after the holiday. But if it's Shabbos, you're going to need to, because you can't cook on Shabbos ever. So you start the cooking process before Rosh Hashanah even starts, on the eve, the day before Rosh Hashanah begins, before that night starts. You just cook a little bit of the meal so that symbolically you've already started cooking that meal for Shabbos that you're going to cook on Yom Tov, and you're not really cooking the meal for Shabbos on Yom Tov because you already started cooking it before Yom Tov, before the holiday. So that's another kind of legal structure that has ramifications, right? It's a legal edifice in the legal dimension that has ramifications, implications in the spiritual dimension. It affects our spirituality because it affects that enclosure of holiness. That's what Eruvin is all about, creating an enclosure of holiness. All right, that's where we are and what we're doing. Yesterday, we started we opened the discussion about an Eruv, that deposit of food in order to move the Sabbath boundaries, let's say, that it was deposited in a cupboard, the safe place where we're going to put those 2 meals worth of food in order to change my physical space so that I can carry in some locations or throughout this neighborhood or through those courtyards, or so I can get to my friend's house in that direction. I'm going to deposit that food in a cupboard, and I locked it, and then I lost the key. And the Mishnah number 6 in chapter 3, said that if we lost the key, the Eruv is still a valid Eruv. Now, we've been learning that if I don't have access to my Eruv, if I can't get to my food without carrying it through a public domain and into a private domain, for example, and I would violate the laws of Shabbos, so then it's not a valid Eruv, and whatever I was trying to do didn't work. It didn't take hold, and I don't have that Eruv established if I don't have access to it. But now in this Mishnah we hear, well, we lose access to the food that's in the cupboard. We know where the food is. It's in the right kind of domain. I'm in a private domain. The cupboard's in a private domain. I'm not going to violate a law like that. But I can't get at the food because it's in that cupboard and it's locked and I lost the key. Nevertheless, says the Mishnah, the Eruv is good. Whatever I was trying to accomplish, whichever kind of Eruv I was trying to accomplish, it's valid. Why? That was the question we asked at the end of yesterday's class. Why is it still valid? Okay, let me get to my notes. Yesterday. Okay, why is it a valid Eruv? Today, on today's DAF, page 35 in Tractate Eruvin, the Gemara, the rabbis of the Talmud, suggest that the Mishnah was missing words. It was incomplete. What the Mishnah should have included was to say that if the Eruv is in a cupboard on festivals and the key is lost, it's still a valid Eruv because we could carry on the festival, right? We can bring the key. This is if we find the key. But on Shabbos, no. If we lock the Eruv in a cupboard on Shabbos and lose the key, now we can't open it, we lose access, the Eruv is not a valid Eruv. Now, that's the suggestion we open with on this page, but that contradicts the plain meaning of the Mishnah. So how do we explain this? The Gemara is suggesting, if the key is found according to this reading, okay, the Mishnah was incomplete. If the Eruv is in a cupboard on festivals and the key is lost, it's valid, but if it's on Shabbos, no. And if the key is found, it is not a valid Eruv. You're like, wait, Sal, what do you mean? If the key is found, then we have access to the cupboard. That should make the Eruv valid. Why is the Gemara now saying that if we find the key, the Eruv is not valid, as opposed to when it was lost and then it was valid? How could this be? Okay, Rabbi. So here, what the Mishnah, what the Gemara suggests, is that if the key is found, it is not valid, and it's not going to explain why yet. But Rabbi Eliezer is going to disagree with that idea, and he's going to say that if the key is found in the country, no, the Eruv is not valid. So if we lose the key and then we find it, but we find it out in the countryside somewhere, then it's not going to be a valid Eruv. Why? Because it's in an unenclosed field. That's a Carmelis. in order to bring the key to the cupboard, which is in some kind of a private domain, I would have to carry from a Carmelis into a private domain, from an unenclosed field into a private domain, and that's prohibited according to the rabbis, so it's not a valid Eruv. However, according to Rabbi Eliezer, if we find the key and it's in the city, it's in an enclosed field, like a karpef, like we learned in chapter 2, it's in a courtyard, it's on a rooftop, it's in one of the domains that we can carry it without violating Shabbos from where we find it to where the cupboard is, then it's a valid Eruv. Now that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. But, let's see, Rabba and Rav Yosef say, yeah, that is an interesting interpretation of it. Okay, so the way we needed to understand it was that if it's lost, it's valid, and that's not explained why yet. If it's found, then it's not going to be valid if it's lost in the country, but it is going to be valid if it's lost and found. Lost and found in the country, not valid. Lost and found in the city, valid. Now we go to a different understanding of the Mishnah entirely. Rabbah and Rav Yosef say, no. What's happening here is that this is a wooden cupboard, right? The cupboard that is locked up is made out of wood. That's going to matter. Now, it's a wooden cupboard. And the dispute, Rabbah and Rav Yosef are both saying, we're talking about a wooden cupboard. And what's in the dispute in the Mishnah, the reason there's two different outcomes depending on what's going to happen here, the dispute in the Mishnah hinges on whether the wooden cupboard is considered a wooden utensil, right? Like a bread box is really a utensil. It's just like a portable storage device for some bread. So if it's locked in there, that's a utensil. A utensil can be dismantled if it's a simple dismantling, right? If you don't need power tools to do it, like you could just take apart, if you have a nutcracker, that's something you can use on Shabbos. There's problems with nuts, let's not talk about that. But utensils that you can use, like if you have a complex spoon that it can come apart, right? Like the handle can actually come off in a simple way. So you can take apart a wooden utensil and put it back together and not violate Shabbos as long as you don't need tools in order to do that. But if the cupboard is big enough, according to Rabbi Eliezer, that it actually constitutes like a tent or a building, it's a structure, it has some kind of minimum, significance, that now if you were to make a hole in it or dismantle it or somehow pry apart its boards in order to get at the Eruv inside it, you would violate Shabbos because you'd be performing the prohibited labor, prohibited on a biblical level, of demolishing, right? You can neither build nor demolish a structure on Shabbos. That's why you can't open an umbrella. You're actually building a roof over your head when you open an umbrella on Shabbos, and so that's prohibited on Shabbos. Okay, so now they're saying it's the wooden cupboard, and according to the one who says it's a utensil, okay, so we could just dismantle it. So if the key is lost, it's a valid Eruv because we could still get in there. We don't have to get in there, but we have a legal way, right? A path that is permissible to get into it. So since we have that possibility, it's a valid Eruv. Or if it's a building and the only way into it is to dismantle/demolish it, it would really be an act of demolishing, then we don't have access and it's not a valid Eruv. And the halacha is, and if the key is lost and found, so that the halacha now is, this is how the law is established, if there's a cupboard and it was locked in there and the key was lost, the halacha is that and then the key is found, right? The key was lost and then the key is found on Shabbos. The law is that if you can get the key to the cupboard without violating Shabbos, it's a valid Eruv. And if you can't get the key to the cupboard without violating Shabbos, then it is not a valid Eruv. Now there's a whole other way to interpret the Mishnah. Abaye and Rava said, no, you've misunderstood the dispute. That's not how it worked. What's actually happening is that there was a cupboard that the air was inside. They locked it, but the lock had the form of leather straps that surrounded this cabinet, and then like a padlock on the leather strap. When they lost the key, they didn't find it. The question is, can you bring a knife and cut the leather strap so that you could get into it? Is that a legal way to get at your Eruv by cutting the leather strap that locks it in a cupboard, a cabinet? And the answer is, and so the dispute turns on the question of whether we can use a knife to cut the leather strap. Rabbi Yosei says a utensil that is permitted to be used on Shabbos for permitted use, like a knife, can also be used for a permitted action, like cutting a leather strap, even though that's not what a steak knife is intended, it's designed for. It's not the intended use of it. Rabbi Eliezer disagrees. He says that we cannot use a utensil on Shabbos for any other use than its intended use, right? And as we saw, this was part of a bigger controversy that we saw often in Tractate Shabbos about muktzeh items that are set aside from use on Shabbos. And the law is actually that even something that is designed for a use that is not permitted on Shabbos, we can touch it if we need its place. We want to, like somebody left a calculator on the dinner table. Okay, I can move it. I should lift it in not the way I would ordinarily pick it up, because there's no permitted use of a calculator on Shabbos. You can't turn it on. You can't have electronics. You can't have lights. You can't do addition like that. You can't use that on Shabbos. But you can move the calculator. And let's say you needed, for whatever reason, you had a very expensive table and you didn't want to get a water ring, a liquid, like, what do you call that? Like a, moisture ring around the glass on a table. So you could use that expensive calculator as a coaster. Yes, you could do that on Shabbos because that's a permitted use, even though it's not the intended use of that calculator. That is permitted. So the law is like Rabbi Yosei in this and not like Rabbi Eliezer, who would restrict things from being used for not their intended purpose. So since we can bring a knife and we can cut the strap, what's inside the cabinet is accessible to us, it's a valid Eruv. And according to Rabbi Eliezer, it would not be a valid Eruv. Okay. Does that bring us to Mishnah number 7? Yes, it does. All right, Mishnah number 7 of chapter 3, Tractate Eruvin. We've been talking quite a bit, especially with regards to Rebbe, that we said that if something was accessible, like if you needed to violate a rabbinic prohibition in order to access your Eruv, your stash of food on Shabbos, so then it's not an Eruv. It's not permitted, and so it was not a valid Eruv. But if you could access it at twilight, right? If you could still get there, and the only thing, you're not violating a biblical prohibition, but only a rabbinic prohibition, at twilight, this is an activity that you are allowed to perform during the week, right? Something that's rabbinically prohibited on Shabbos is usually allowed during the week. Twilight, we're not sure if it's Shabbos yet or not. There's doubt whether it's still the week or Shabbos has begun. In cases of doubt, Rebbe says we rule leniently on things that are prohibited on Shabbos only by a rabbinic decree as opposed to a biblical law. Remember that rabbinic decrees just make a fence around the Torah to protect us from coming to violate biblical laws. But there's more rabbinic laws than Torah laws. They're for our protection, and that's why we're going to be lenient when we're dealing with them in cases of doubt. So, twilight is the key, and now we're going to see why twilight is so key in this Mishnah. Let's read it. Mishnah number 7, here in chapter 3. If one's Eruv, the food, rolled beyond the Shabbos techum, the limit, the boundary of how far you can walk on Shabbos. So somehow the Eruv rolled outside of my limit, my boundary. And I no longer have access to the Eruv since I can't walk further away than my boundary. And somehow the Eruv fell out of my boundary. Or if a pile of stones fell on the Eruv, or if it was burnt, or if the Eruv was made out of consecrated food that only a priest could eat, and it became tameh, so that it was disqualified because it became ritually impure, and now not even the priest can eat it, nobody can eat it, so it's not a valid Eruv. So if any of these things, that somehow the Eruv became displaced and it rolled out of the place where I would have access to it, or it became ritually impure, or it burned up, or a pile of rocks fell on it and I just couldn't get at it. If any of these things happened before twilight, before Shabbos started, when we know Shabbos hasn't started, meaning it's still day. We haven't entered that twilight period where there's even a doubt. But if these things happen during day, if the Eruv became inaccessible or ruined while it was still day on Friday, then it is not a valid Eruv. But if the Eruv was still valid when twilight began, then it is a valid Eruv. If any of these occurrences take place while it was still day prior to the onset of Shabbos, it is not a valid Eruv, since one did not have an Eruv at twilight, which is the time one's Shabbos residence is established. However, if any of these occurred after dark, when it was already Shabbos, it is a valid Eruv, as it was intact and accessible at the time one's Shabbos residence is determined. Now here it says after dark, right? So for sure, if it happened during day, it's no good. For sure, if it got ruined when it was already dark, the Eruv is valid. Twilight is where we might have a question. And it was intact and accessible at the time when Shabbos residence is determined, it is a valid Eruv. If the matter is in doubt, i.e., if he does not know when one of the aforementioned incidents occurred, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda say, this person is in the position of both a donkey driver and a camel driver. A donkey driver leads the animal from in front. A camel driver pushes the animal from behind, sort of prods the animal from behind. Meaning he's going to have to be careful both in the direction that the Eruv would have taken him if it was valid, and in the direction that his old dwelling was if the Eruv was invalid. In other words, he has to take on the stringencies of both positions, and his Shabbos boundary is compressed, right? Because of the doubt, his world on Shabbos is going to be smaller than it would have been but for the doubt. Due to the uncertainty concerning his Shabbos border, he must act stringently as though his resting place were both in his own town and at the location where he placed the Eruv. He must restrict his Shabbos movement to those areas that are within 2,000 cubits of both locations. Rabbi Yosei and Rabbi Shimon disagree with Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yosei and Rabbi Shimon say an Eruv whose validity is in doubt is nevertheless valid. An Eruv whose validity is in doubt, so this is where you get the idea that if the problem happened at twilight, so its validity would be in doubt, or if we're just not sure when it went bad, but we know that it was good during the day, so we're in doubt when it happened. So Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Shimon say it's a valid Eruv. As long as there's a doubt and it's not definitely bad, it's valid. We're going to err on the side, we're going to be lenient and err on the side of in doubt. It's a valid Eruv. An Eruv whose validity is in doubt is nevertheless valid. Rabbi Yosef said, the sage Avtolemos testified in the name of 5 elders that an Eruv whose validity is in doubt is valid. And who was Avtolemos? Avtolemos, almost nothing is known about Avtolemos. He was one of Rabbi Yosef's teachers, and Rabbi Yosef quotes his statements in the name of the 5 elders with regard to a variety of issues. Some commentaries identify Avtolemos with Avtolemos ben Eruvin, who was granted special permission by the sages to dress and cut his hair in the Gentile manner to facilitate his efforts on behalf of the Jewish people, as he had intimate ties with the Roman government. He was in tight with the emperor and the Senate in Rome. That was a great value and protection to the Jewish people. And so they made special allowances for his hair and clothing so he could fit in with the Romans because it helped the Jewish people very much, protected them, saved lives. Ptolemos may be the son of Rabbi Eruvin Halstrobeli, who also fulfilled a similar function in Rome. So it was a multi-generational family, sort of, representing the Jewish people, almost like an unofficial ambassador, but holding up their rights and helping them out from Rome. Okay, so the big question here is an Eruv that was it like does it need to be good? It can go bad, right? It can fall apart on Shabbos as long as it was good at the onset of Shabbos. And if we're in doubt whether it was valid at the onset of Shabbos, it's a valid Eruv. We can rely on it. And it makes sense. We're being lenient because the whole Eruv structure is a rabbinic addition. It's actually started with King Solomon, but it's an addition to the Torah. The Torah doesn't mention an Eruv. The rabbis saw that within the laws of the Torah, an Eruv was required in order to maximize our enjoyment, our rejoicing in Shabbos. We rest and we rejoice on Shabbos. Resting is abstaining from all the work. Rejoicing is doing all the positive, beautiful things of Shabbos. And an Eruv allows us to rejoice in Shabbos by allowing people to come to us, things to come to us, what we need for the rejoicing. Rava clarifies the first clause of this Mishnah that if the Eruv rolled out of my boundary, right, is established in a place that was reachable by me because of my boundary, and now it rolled out of my boundary. I mean, there's a weird question here, like how could it roll out of your boundary? Isn't it the center? And at the center, it's got 2,000 cubits, but I just can't think of what the particulars of the case are. But somehow the Eruv itself is near the edge of the greater Eruv, and it rolled outside of it. So Rava clarifies, well, if it rolled just 4 cubits outside of the border, it's still good. 3 handbreadths, we know it would still be good because it's as if it's still touching. 4 cubits is larger, but Rava is telling us that since we know that the Eruv itself goes along with sort of 4 cubits of private domain wherever it's standing, those 4 cubits of private domain can join it to the larger Eruv that it rolled out of, and it's still a valid Eruv. A bigger question, why is the Eruv going to be no good if stones fell on it before twilight? It's said that if the Eruv was destroyed before twilight, right? So we're sure that the Eruv was no good before twilight. It's not going to be a valid Eruv. But now the Gemara asks, well, one of the cases of destroying the Eruv was that a bunch of stones fell on it. This is going to be the last teaching, by the way, so if you have questions or comments, get it in there now. If a pile of stones, a wall of stones fell on the Eruv before Shabbos began, why does it cancel the Eruv? Why is it invalid? We know from Rebbe, according to Rebbe, that things that are prohibited only rabbinically, they can be done during the twilight period. So if the only thing that's lacking to get the Eruv accessible to us is something that is prohibited rabbinically, then we had the possibility at twilight to undo that damage. Then whether we did it or not, it's going to be of legal significance enough to sort of protect that legal structure that's going to give us, a positive impact in the spiritual dimension. The Eruv will be good. Why? Because according to Rebbe, we could move the rocks. We could just pick up the rocks, right? We can't move rocks on Shabbos because they're muktzah. But that's a rabbinic prohibition. We can't pick up stones and twigs and rocks and just dirt and stuff on the ground because we have no Shabbos use for it, right? Stones and dirt and rocks, moving them is the work of the week. So one of the rabbinic prohibitions is we don't touch rocks on Shabbos. They have no Shabbos purpose. So it's muktzah. But at twilight, we could do it, right? It's permitted to just move the rocks off, just move them. It's only rabbinically prohibited. It's not biblically prohibited. So at twilight, we could have just moved the rocks off the Eruv. Now we have access to the Eruv throughout Shabbos. Since we had the possibility to do that, it should be a valid Eruv, even though the rocks fell over on it. on before Shabbos. Now, this is according to Rebbe, but the rabbis who disagree with Rebbe and are the majority say, no, you can't. Things that are prohibited rabbinically are also prohibited at twilight. So this is only according to Rebbe. But then the Gemara answers, but even according to Rebbe, if so many rocks fell on the Eruv that we would need a shovel or a hoe or some kind of tool to dig out the Eruv from under those rocks, then that would be obviously a biblically prohibited labor, and therefore the Eruv is not accessible to us on Shabbos. We couldn't have done that even at twilight, and therefore the Eruv is no good. And whatever we were trying to accomplish with that Eruv, whatever kind of Eruv it was, move the boundary, join the courtyards, it's not a valid Eruv. Okay, that's what I've got for us tonight. So, before we go to the questions, the takeaway. What is an Eruv? It is transforming our space to create and preserve an enclosure of holiness. It allows us within a legal framework, it creates a legal framework, a legal building, a legal structure, as it were, for us to have spiritual delight, to have a delight in Shabbos, which brings us closer to God, closer to the mission of our soul, closer to the souls in our lives, the beloved souls in our lives. All of that is made possible by making these adjustments in our space. And we're going to study the Torah of this so carefully so that we don't make a mistake and do it wrong, since our whole purpose is to preserve and guard holiness. Let us get to your questions. Okay. Here we go. I only have one question so far. Lynn says, if we can carry on a weekday festival, a weekday Yom Tov, why do we need to set up an Eruv for the Yom Tov at all? An Eruv allows one to carry. A Shabbos Eruv already covers a Yom Tov that happens on a Sabbath day. Yeah, that's a great question. Since we've been told that we can carry in order for the purpose of cooking, is all carrying permitted? Is it? Is it according to all opinions that carrying is permitted? I'm not sure. But that would seem to be the issue. The question is excellent. Why do we have a Yom Tov Eruv? Not everybody holds by the Eruv. What is it that we're trying to carry? Are things distinguished? As we've seen so many times when we have a general principle that seems to work, the rabbis make it their business to find the exceptions. I just don't have the exceptions at hand. Okay, just going to double check that there's nothing else over here, that I'm not missing something. Charles Willery, what is considered the Sabbath in Jewish beliefs? I'm not sure what you're asking me. If it's the Saturday, we use Saturday as the Sabbath. The seventh day is Saturday, even though in the greater culture people would say Sunday. But what constitutes Shabbos? Go to accidentaltalmudist.org and AT Daily, and we talk about it over and over again. But the big summation is, on the seventh day God rested, and he sanctified the seventh day and declared that it was holy because God rested from God's work. So we should rest from our work. We stop all work. We protect ourselves from doing any kind of work. And our world gets tighter and tighter and tighter, leaves all the hustle and bustle behind, and we create a space of light and holiness where our souls thrive. And anybody who's a human being should have a seventh day of rest. And like the best thing you can do in the year 2020 to make your Shabbos special, if you're not doing this already, is to turn off all screens. No phone, no computer, no TV, no iPad. Don't use the touch screen on the oven or the fridge. Just turn it all off. And that way you won't be looking at some, show of false importance telling you what to be afraid of and what to be angry about and what to panic about and what to get busy with, and just look at the people in your world. And if there's no one immediately around you, not another person, then look in the mirror, because your relationship with yourself needs a day of rest just as much as your relationship with everybody else needs a day of rest of taking stock. My friends, may you have a beautiful rest of your Sunday. Tomorrow is Monday. We're getting very close to Rosh Hashanah, which begins next Friday night. This is the time to take stock, make an accounting of the soul, look back over your deeds of the past year, identify the areas where you did well so you could do more, identify the areas where you did not so well, where you did wrong, where you did bad, where you let people down, where you let yourself down, where you let God down. Figure out, not just resolve to do better, because that's not going to accomplish anything. Figure out what it's going to take to do better. What is the organization you need to make in your life? What is the idea you need to commit to in your life to make this real? Nina taught us this past Shabbos, quoting Rabbi Avigdor Miller from last week's Torah portion, that these commandments of this expression of God's will, which is the Torah, which includes 613 commandments for the Jews and the 7 commandments for the children of Noah, which apply to the whole world. These commandments, they're not somewhere, across the sea that people should say, who's going to go across the sea and bring it back for us? It's not on a mountain to say who's going to climb a mountain or go into the heaven to get it. It's here. It's for us to do now. And the Torah says it's very near to you, in your mouth and in your heart to do it. And Rabbi Miller, Nina said in Rabbi Miller's name, that it should be in your heart and in your mouth to do it. You should form the resolve first, and then you'll say the words, and then you'll do it, right? It should be thought, speech, deed is the way you make things happen in this world. But it's not. The Torah says it's in your mouth and in your heart to do it. You speak it first, and then that starts to work on your heart and transform your world so that you start behaving like the man or woman or whatever you want to become, what you've been saying you're going to become all your life. As Bruce Springsteen says, it's time to start being the man or woman you intended to be all these years. And the way you do that is by declaring it. Declare it. Say what it is you want to accomplish. Say it out loud with your lips so that your ears can hear it. And then figure out how you're going to commit to do that in the coming year. I bless you all that you should grow in light and wisdom every day.